Wyoming Territory, 1889. Emeline Hart had exactly 3 hours. She had counted them from the moment Silas Crane came to her door that morning, the second morning in a row, and told her, with the patience of a man who dislikes repeating himself, that the amount owed was $16, and that if it was not on his desk before sundown, he would file with the county office at first light. Once that process began, the legal fees would be added to the debt. He would not delay the sale a second time. $16. She had $6.40. She had $6.40 after selling the last of her canned peaches that morning, after the mending she had delivered to Mrs. Pruitt on Tuesday, after 3 shirts finished by lamplight on Wednesday, with her eyes burning from the strain. 640 was not 16. She had stood in the yard after Crane rode off, looking at the small homestead her father had worked for 19 years, the cabin, the shed, the half-dozen hens, the kitchen plot going to weed for lack of time to tend it. And she understood, with the cold clarity that arrives only when the alternatives run out, that there was one thing left to try. Journey was in the paddock. The gray horse lifted his head when she crossed the yard and pressed his nose into her shoulder the way he had since he was 2 years old, when her father brought him home and said, "This one's for you, Emmy. He'll look after you when I can't." Her father had been dead 11 months. Journey had been looking after her since. Daniel Hart had also taught her to keep the homestead ledger before he taught her to sit a saddle. He used to say a farm was lost more often to bad arithmetic than bad weather. She had run the numbers 3 times that morning. They came out the same each time. She held Journey's nose to her shoulder and did not pretend the sum would change. It needed $10 she did not have, and she owned exactly one thing worth more than $10, and she meant to sell it to the single man in the territory she trusted to treat it right. Her father had told her this in the last weeks of his life, plainly, the way a man speaks when he knows he is leaving things unfinished. If you ever have to let Journey go, take him to Caleb Whitmore. He knows horses, and he's an honest man. He'll do right by the animal. He'd said it once, without repeating himself. She had carried it for 11 months without needing it. She needed it now. She went inside and got her coat. Daniel Hart had left his daughter 35 acres on the north bench of the valley and a wide set of skills. Not the richest ground in the county, not the poorest. The kind that gave back what a person put into it, if the person worked it right. It had been enough for one man and his daughter and a gray horse. It was not enough for a woman alone. That truth hadn't arrived all at once. It came the way such truths usually do, first as a worry, then as arithmetic that refused to balance. She had tried everything she knew. She sewed a shirt in under 3 hours when the light was good, and the wives on the larger spreads paid a fair wage for careful work. She sold preserves and dried apples at the Larkspur market on Saturdays, hauling it all herself on Journey, who made the deliveries possible and ate feed that cost money she barely had. The debt had started small. In the week after the funeral, she'd needed cash for county tax, winter feed, and a roof repair that couldn't wait. She had borrowed $11 from Silas Crane at terms that sounded reasonable until she understood them fully. She'd been paying the principal down the way a person moves a boulder an inch at a time, walking the same road to his office most weeks for nearly a year. She missed one payment in October when a mule kicked over her sewing basket and cost her 4 days of work with a sprained wrist. She missed another last week. This morning Crane had come himself. She'd listened from the porch with flour still on her hands from the bread she'd been kneading. She hadn't argued, because there was nothing left to argue. The terms were the terms, and she had signed them. The remaining principal stood at $9. With interest and the penalty for a second late notice, the total due came to $16. When he left, she finished the bread, because the bread needed finishing. She'd baked 11 loaves and stacked them on the table and stood in the kitchen with the smell of it filling the room and the weight of $9.60 pressing on her chest. When he Bodstuik. The Whitmore ranch sat 14 minutes from the Hart place by horseback. 14 minutes that covered, in most respects that mattered, the distance between 2 very different operations. 600 acres of the best grass in the valley. A house built solid and larger than one man strictly needed. The biggest private barn in the county. Cattle moving across the south range like a slow brown tide visible from the road. Caleb Whitmore had taken over the operation at 27, 5 years back, running it by the plain method of outworking everyone else and asking good questions of people who knew more than he did. He'd known her father the way good neighbors know each other. A shared fence line, mutual respect, the occasional word at the Larkspur market. He had watched the Hart homestead from that same respectful distance for 11 months. He hadn't interfered, because Daniel Hart's daughter was plainly capable and plainly proud, and a man who interfered with capable, proud people usually didn't stay neighbors with them long. He'd told himself as much, more than once, standing on the ridge at night watching her lamp burn late in the cabin window. Emeline rode Journey to the Whitmore gate at 2:30. Caleb was in the round pen working a young bay, patient work that asked the horse to understand rather than obey. He saw her at the gate and read something in the straight way she sat the saddle, the way a person sits when they are holding something together by will alone, and handed the bay's lead to his hired man and walked over. Jessie watched him go with the look of a man filing something away for later. Caleb pulled off his hat at the gate. Emeline, Caleb. She had rehearsed 3 different openings on the ride over. None of them began the way she actually began. I need to sell Journey. He looked at the horse. He looked at her. He said nothing, which was the right thing to say, and his silence gave her room to keep going. Silas Crane is calling the debt due before sundown. I'm short $9.60, and I have nothing left worth selling but this horse. She held his eyes. My father said if I ever had to let him go, to bring him to you. He said you'd treat him right. Caleb looked at Journey a long moment. The gray stood watching him back with the calm, thorough attention of an animal taking a measurement of his own. How much do you need? $10, she said. That covers the gap and carries me through the month. She lifted her chin. I know what he's worth. I know $10, isn't it? But it's what I need, and it's what I'm asking for. Caleb Whitmore looked at the woman standing at his gate on a Monday afternoon and thought about 11 months of a lamp burning late on the north bench, and a man who had once told him, not as a suggestion, but as a plain fact, that his daughter was the most capable person on either side of their shared fence. He settled his hat back on his head. Come inside, he said. We ought to talk about something other than a sale. She followed him, because there was no better offer on the table. He held the door. She sat at the kitchen table, her legs more tired from the ride than she'd let herself notice. He put coffee on. She didn't refuse it. While it came to heat, she looked around the kitchen, a pantry organized by someone who understood cattle but not provisioning, bulk goods stacked in the wrong order, no plan for rotation, coffee stored beside the lamp oil, which was careless and, worse, a fire risk. She filed it away and looked back at the table. You're short $9.60, he said. Yes, and what's left on the note after today's payment? $9. Monthly payment, $2. He sat across from her and drank his coffee and went still in the particular way she recognized from the Larkspur market, the way he went when he was working out a sum he intended to get exactly right. I'm not looking for charity, she said. I know that, he said. I'm not offering it. He held her eyes. I'm looking for someone who can run the house here, the accounts, the stores, the scheduling. My housekeeper left in August. I've got 6 hands and no order to anything that happens inside these walls. He glanced at the pantry, which she'd already taken the measure of. The position pays $3 a week. You'd keep your own land. You could ride over daily, or stay here through the busy stretches, depending on the season's work. She looked at him. That's a fair wage for that work. It's what the work is worth. If you take it, I front you $10 against your first pay. You settle Crane today. You keep Journey. He can run here. Better pasture, better feed. He held her eyes. That's a practical arrangement. It serves us both. She looked at the kitchen. She looked at the crooked pantry. She looked at this man who had known her father and had watched 11 months of a late lamp from the ridge without once riding down to knock on her door. Why didn't you come before now? She asked. He looked into his cup. Because you didn't ask. He held her eyes again. And because your father told me once that you had more pride than good sense, which he meant as the highest compliment he knew how to pay. I respected that. Maybe I respected it too long. He paused. I'd rather give the 2 of you a home. The position and pasture for Journey. That isn't charity. That's a practical arrangement. She sat in Caleb Whitmore's kitchen with $6.40 to her name and less than 2 hours until sundown. She thought of her father saying, *, take him to Caleb Whitmore. He'll treat the animal right. She had believed he meant only the horse. All right, she said. I'll take the position. He stood. I'll get the $10. She paid Silas Crane $16 flat. He accepted the money with the look of a man who had expected a different afternoon. She didn't explain where it had come from. She walked back to Journey and pressed her forehead to his and stood there a moment in the fading Larkspur light. Then she rode home, made supper, and went to bed. She started at the Whitmore ranch on Wednesday. The household accounts were a disaster, not from neglect but from the accumulated disorder of a busy man with no system for anything inside four walls. She spent the first day taking inventory. She spent the second building a system. On Friday afternoon, Jesse came into the kitchen while she was rearranging the pantry and stopped short in the doorway. The coffee was where a man could find it, he said. She looked at him. It was stored next to the lamp oil. I knew where it was. It was also a fire hazard. Jesse studied the new arrangement of the shelves. He studied Emeline. He studied the shelves again. Caleb, no, you moved everything. Caleb hired me to run the house. The pantry's part of the house. Jesse leaned against the frame, wearing the look of a man who's just witnessed something worth remembering. You've been here 3 days. The pantry needed attention on day 1, she said. I was being patient. He nodded slowly and said, Caleb's going to notice, and went to find him at the south fence, where he reported, without preamble. New housekeeper moved the coffee. Caleb looked at him. Is that a problem? Jesse thought it over. No, and went back to work. That evening, when Caleb came in for supper and could not find the flour where he expected it, he stood in the doorway and said nothing, because Emeline was at the stove, and the kitchen smelled of fresh bread, and he understood, the way a man understands after 6 years of eating his own poor cooking, that this was better, and the flour question could wait. She told him about the overpayments on Friday. She'd been braced for some reaction, unsure which kind. He sat at the table and studied the figures she'd laid out. 3 suppliers, 5 months, $8.40 overpaid, with the look of a man reading something he wished he'd caught sooner. You found this in 3 days, he said. The filing had room for improvement. How much room? Considerable. She looked at the ledger. My father taught me to keep books before he taught me to ride. He said land goes under from bad arithmetic more often than bad weather. Caleb studied the figures, then studied her. He said that about you too. She looked up. About me, specifically. Last time I spoke to him, Caleb said, about a month before he passed. He said the Hart place would outlast him because you kept better books than he did. He held her eyes. I thought he meant it as comfort at the time. I'm starting to think he meant it as fact. Emeline looked at the ledger and thought of a man who had kept the fence line and the horse and his daughter's arithmetic all in the same careful corner of his mind. She thought of 11 months managing on her own. I've written the 3 suppliers, she said. You should see corrections by month's end. Caleb looked at the figures once more. $3 a week, he said. Is that still the rate we agreed? It's what you offered. It isn't enough, not for what you're doing here. We agreed on 3, she said. Caleb, don't change the terms. In Lunfon. He looked at her. She held his gaze. I need to know what the terms are, she said. And he understood what she meant, that she needed the arrangement to stay exactly what it was until she knew what else it might become. He nodded. $3, as agreed. He went back to the cattle. She went back to the ledger. Jesse, mending a bridle in the next room and hearing all of it, said nothing and went outside to make a private note. November turned the pass. By December, the lower fence rails vanished under drift, and Emeline's 14-minute ride became 40 minutes of careful going that Journey managed with the patience of a horse who has done harder work than this. On the 3rd such day, Caleb mentioned, without particular ceremony, that the spare room off the kitchen sat empty, and it made no sense for her to ride 40 minutes in the dark when the work was here. She moved into the spare room. She told herself it was practical. She told herself that every morning, sitting at the kitchen table with her coffee before the house woke, watching the Wyoming dark turn gray, and then that particular blue of a winter morning, listening for the 3rd stair tread that told her Caleb was up. She knew he took his coffee plain. She knew he read at the table for a quarter hour before going out, and that on the mornings something weighed on him. He read the same page twice without noticing. There had been more of those mornings in December than in November. One evening she found him in the barn after supper, working a harness by lamplight. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual sat on the bench beside him, a leather-handled awl, old, mended more than once and used carefully each time. She knew the mark stamped into the handle before she recognized anything else about it. That was my father's, she said. Caleb looked at the tool, then at her. He lent it to me 4 years back. I kept meaning to return it. He turned it in his hands. After he died, He stopped. He looked at the lamp. I kept it because it was the last thing he ever lent me. I should have brought it to you. I didn't know how. She stood in the barn doorway, looking at a tool she'd last seen in her father's hand. She thought of a man who had trusted Caleb enough to lend him something and expect it back. She thought, take him to Caleb Whitmore. She crossed the barn, took the awl from his hands, turned it over, and gave it back. Keep it, she said. He'd want it used. Caleb held the tool. He held her eyes. He talked about you, he said, often. Every time I saw him. She looked at the lamp and went back inside and did not examine too closely what she was feeling, which was the particular warmth of a place that had begun, sometime between November and December, to feel like hers. On the first Monday of January, Emeline rode to Larkspur to make the monthly payment on the Crane debt. She had her $2 ready in an envelope prepared the night before. She laid it on the counter. The clerk looked at it, looked at his ledger, looked at her with the face of a man whose paper doesn't match what's in front of him. "Miss Hart," he said, "the account's settled, in full." He turned the ledger to show her. January 15th, a payment of $9 against the full remaining principal. The account closed. Emeline stared at the entry. January 15th, she had been at the Whitmore ranch that day, reorganizing the provision schedule that morning, and fighting a broken wagon Jesse couldn't fix all afternoon. She looked at the payment line, Caleb Whitmore. She folded her $2 back into her pocket, thanked the clerk, and walked out into the cold Larkspur street. She stood on the boardwalk. She thought of a Monday in November and a man who'd said, "That's a practical arrangement. It serves us both." She thought of $3 a week and don't change the terms. She thought of $8.40 in overpayments and a leather-handled awl on a workbench. She thought of her father talking about her every time he saw Caleb Whitmore. She thought of $9 paid on January 15th without a word to her. She got on Journey and rode back to the ranch. She hadn't decided what she meant to say, only that she meant to say something before she found a reason not to. He was at the south fence. She rode to him, dismounted, stood beside him. He read her face before she spoke. "You went to the lending office," he said. "Yes." A pause. "It was $9, Caleb." "It wasn't. That isn't the point. I know that isn't the point." He looked at the mountains, then at her. "I should have told you. I didn't, because I knew you wouldn't take it if I asked first." A pause. "I was right about that. It doesn't make it right." She stood very still. "I was wrong," he said. "Helping you didn't give me the right to decide for you. The $9 can sit exactly as it is. You repay it in wages, or I ask Crane to reverse the entry and we settle it some other way. Your choice. Both are genuinely on the table." She looked at the fence, then at Journey grazing a few yards off with the whole ease of an animal who has found good ground and knows it. "That," she said, "is the first honest thing you've said to me today." He held her eyes. "Yes, I know. I'm better at solving a problem than explaining one. I'm working on the explaining." A pause. "I'm not naturally good at it." She almost smiled. "Why?" "Because I dislike talking. Because when I care about something, I act instead of speaking on it. It's a consistent failing." He looked at his hands. "I paid the $9 because I couldn't stand watching you carry it, not because you couldn't manage it. You manage things better than I've managed my own house in 6 years. I paid it because I didn't want you to have to. That's the honest reason. I should have found a way to say so at the time, instead of acting alone." She stood at the fence, looking at a man who had paid $9 and said nothing for 3 weeks, and had just handed her 3 real choices and admitted a failing without dressing it up. She thought of a house that had started, somewhere between November and December, to feel like her own. She thought of an awl on a bench, and second readings of the same page, and a lamp watched from a ridge. She thought of her father saying, "He'll treat the animal right." She had believed he meant only the horse. "Give me until Sunday," she said, "not to decide whether I care for you. I already know that." She held his eyes. "To decide whether I can trust you with the knowing." He nodded. No argument, no persuading. "Sunday," he said. She rode home. Behind her, Jesse, who'd been checking the east fence and had heard most of it, waited until she was well gone, then walked over to Caleb. "April," Jesse said. Caleb looked at him. "What?" "I'm betting on April, for the proposal." He went back to work. She came back on Sunday, not with an answer she'd only just found, but with the one she'd already known, and spent 3 days deciding she could trust. He was on the porch when she rode in, which told her he'd been watching for her, and she noted it. She tied Journey at the post and climbed the steps and sat down beside him. They looked out at the Wyoming February, snow still on the low ground, the mountains sharp, Journey standing patient at the rail like an animal who had long since decided where he belonged. "The $9, she said. "I'll pay it back through wages, $2 a month till it's clear." "All right," he said, "and you'll ask me next time?" "Yes," he said, "I will." She looked at Journey. "My father knew you," she said. "He trusted you with his tool, and his horse, and his last instruction to me." She held Caleb's eyes. "I've spent a long while trying to work out what he knew that I didn't." A pause. "I think I understand it now." He looked at her with the same direct eyes he'd always had. "What did he know?" "That you solve a problem before you explain it," she said, "and that you're working on the explaining." She held his gaze. "He also knew I had more pride than good sense, which meant I'd need someone who'd be honest with me even when I didn't want to hear it. You were honest on Friday. That mattered." Caleb looked at Journey, then at her. "Emeline," he said. "Yes, I'd like to court you properly." "I know," she said. "I'll let you." She almost smiled, and he saw it this time. "But Caleb, next time you want to do something for me, ask me first." "Yes," he said, "I will." They sat on the porch in the last of the February cold, and Journey lifted his head from the rail and looked at the two of them, then went back to waiting, because he'd known since November how this would end. March came to the valley with the relief of something long overdue. The drifts pulled back. The creek ran high and loud. Journey moved through the new green with the particular enthusiasm of a horse who had been waiting for exactly this since October. Caleb courted her the way he did most things, practically, without much performance. He brought wild flowers once in March, with the faint discomfort of a man who knows the gesture is correct and isn't sure of his own execution. She set them in the window above the sink and said nothing about it, which he understood as thanks. He tried once to tell her the dress she wore that Easter suited her. "That dress suits you," he said. Then, after a moment, "The color, only the color." He glanced toward Jesse near the barn door, who suddenly found urgent business elsewhere. Caleb looked back at Emeline. "The dress suits you," he said again, which wasn't an improvement, but was honest, and she found that on the whole worth considerably more than a man who said the easy thing well. On an April evening she was at the stove, when Caleb came in from the South Range with the particular set of a man who'd decided something and didn't intend to wait any longer. He sat at the table, he looked at his hands, then at her. "I used to think this house was quiet because I preferred it that way," he said. "Now I know it was only waiting on someone whose absence I'd notice." She stopped stirring and turned around. He was looking at her with the same direct eyes he'd had since November. "Emeline Hart," he said. "Will you marry me?" It wasn't a question so much as the last honest thing left to say. She crossed to the table and sat across from him and put her hands flat on the wood. He covered them with his own. "Yes," she said, simply, the way she said everything that mattered. They married in June, in the Larkspur church on a Saturday, the valley green from the snowmelt, the mountains standing clear, half the county turned out to see it. Jesse sat in the third row. He had claimed his seat since morning, the way a man does when he has a stake in the proceedings and wants a clear line of sight. Emeline wore a dress she'd sewn herself, plain cream cotton, practical enough to wear again because she was still Emeline Hart, and Emeline Hart did not make things meant for only one use. Caleb wore his one good shirt, with the mild discomfort of a man who prefers work clothes and will bear the fine ones for the occasions that call for it. Before the ceremony, in the small back room where she waited, Caleb knocked and came in holding something wrapped in cloth. It was her father's awl, cleaned and oiled. "He left it with me," Caleb said. "It ought to go back to Heartland." She held it a moment, looked at the stamp on the handle, looked at Caleb, and thought of a man who had trusted this one with a tool and a horse and a last instruction that had carried more weight than its few words let on. She handed it back. "Keep it," she said. "Between the two places, it'll see more use." He held it. He said nothing, because nothing needed adding. After the ceremony, out in the churchyard, Jesse found Caleb's side. "April 20th, he said. "I won by 10 days. You bet April." Before May counts as April. He held out his hand, and Caleb, after a beat, paid him a silver dollar. "You should have bet February," Caleb said. "I knew February," Jesse said. "I just wasn't sure you did yet," and he walked off satisfied. Caleb looked across the churchyard at Emeline, laughing at something the minister's wife had said, her hair loose and bright in the June light, in the dress she'd made with her own hands, wearing the look of someone who has arrived exactly where she meant to. He thought of a gate in November, and a gray horse, and a woman who'd named a price that wasn't what the animal was worth, because it was what she needed. He thought of his own father, who had kept faith with Daniel Hart along that shared fence line for 30 years. He thought of a lamp watched from a ridge, an awl on a workbench, pages read twice. He crossed the yard to his wife. The Hart homestead never went to auction. That was Emeline's choice, and Caleb never argued it. The 35 acres were hers, her father's work, and her own 11 months of holding it together, and she wasn't giving them up because she'd married a man with 600 more. The two places ran side by side after that, worked with the easy cooperation of neighbors who understood the same ground and kept their separate claim on different corners of it. Journey had the run of both, a privilege he used fully, and was once found in the south pasture with Jesse's hat in his teeth, entirely unrepentant. Emeline kept the Whitmore books. By the end of the first year, she was keeping accounts for 2 neighboring outfits besides, charging a fair rate, never less. Caleb worked the 600 acres with the same patient attention he'd always given them, understanding, as he understood most things, that land gives back only what it's given. One evening, the second spring, on the porch in the last light, Emeline watched Journey graze the near pasture and thought back to a Monday in November, 2 hours left before sundown, $6.40 in her pocket, and a gray horse she'd ridden 14 minutes to the one man her father trusted. She thought of $10 that had become a spare room, a pantry rebuilt, and all returned to a workbench, wildflowers in a kitchen window. She thought of her father, who had left her a homestead, a horse, and a single instruction. He hadn't told her Caleb would give her a home, or that Caleb was the man she'd marry. He had only said, "He'll treat the animal right." Hutuhor. She thought about how right he'd been, about the horse, and everything that came after. Caleb came out with 2 cups of coffee and sat beside her, handing one over. Journey lifted his head from the grass, looked at them both with the calm certainty of an animal who'd known since November exactly where he belonged, and went back to grazing. "Caleb," she said. "Yes." "My father knew," she said. He looked at Journey, then at her. "Yes," he said. "I think he did." She held her coffee in the Wyoming spring evening and looked at everything her father had left her. The land, the horse, the last instruction, and the man that instruction had led her to, and thought that he had never wasted a word, not one. It had been, without question, exactly right. Emeline Hart had ridden to the Whitmore gate on a Monday afternoon in November with a gray horse and a price that wasn't what the animal was worth. She hadn't been selling a horse. She'd been following the last instruction her father ever gave her. Asterisk, take him to Caleb Whitmore. He'll treat the animal right. He had. He'd treated the horse right, the accounts right, and Emeline right too, meaning honestly, patiently, with the understanding that a woman who had held 35 acres together alone for 11 months didn't need rescuing. She needed fair terms, and needed those terms to hold steady until she was ready for them to become more. She needed a man who could own a failing, lay out real choices, and ask next time. That is what love looks like when it's honest. Not rescue, not deciding for someone because you care. Partnership, and a gray horse named Journey, who'd known before either of them did.